everyone, welcome to Cash Up, a weekly show where we're going to converse with amazing folks in DFIR. Today I'm super excited to be joined by the one and only Devon Ackerman. Devon's a digital forensic investigator and incident responder with a vast amount of experience in both law enforcement and the private sector. Currently, he works as a managing director of Kroll's Global Cyber Risk Practice. Prior to his role with Kroll, he was a supervisory special agent and Senior Digital Sciences Forensic Examiner for the Federal Bureau of Investigations in their Digital Evidence Field Operations Unit of the Operational Technology Division. So strong background in both private sector and law enforcement forensics. Devon Ackerman is also one of the original folks behind About DFIR, the definitive compendium project for digital forensics and incident response, a resource that I often use and share with others. He's a frequent speaker. He's spoken at places such as the SANS DFIR Summit. He's been on NPR's Planet Money show and has been published in Pen Test magazine. Devon's been recognized by the community and awarded the Forensic Forecast Digital Forensics Investigator of the Year award. Devon also can get a karaoke room grooving some journey. Devon Ackerman. Hi, Devon. How are you?
I am good. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So speaking of being here, and what everybody would like to know, knowing all that background, how did you get to be Forensic Investigator of the Year and Kroll Managing Director of Cyber Risk? Tell us how you got here. What was your journey?
It has been a fun journey. At the end of the day, it started with an honors internship and an opportunity through Champlain College. My professor at the time, Gary Kessler, who was very involved in the forensics program at Champlain College. I originally went to college for an undergraduate in web design and design management, and realized that is not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. But it was a technical background kind of degree. I wanted to do something, right? But I was very much had an allure to the investigative side of things. Why was this not working? Why was this code not working? But I also recognized my limitations with certain things, and got to a point where trying to chase code issues and databases and ASP and PHP was not exactly one of my strengths. So ended up switching my degree over to digital forensics, which at the time, and this is dating me a little bit, was a brand new degree program. They had just started. In fact, at the time, it was just an undergraduate. They did not have a master's degree yet. And I was one of the original students in some of the original classes for most of the digital forensics program at Champlain. And during that process, through Gary, with a couple other students, we were introduced to the FBI's honors internship program. That is how I ultimately got my foot in the door. At the time, I owned an IT company. So the way I paid my way through college was I had a business on the side and worked all day, 9 to 5, 9 to 6. And did my college after hours and during the night, and then woke up and repeated the cycle. But I had an IT company on the side, and that's certainly wasn't forensics, but it got me into the field, of technology, got me into the field of building things, troubleshooting things, figuring out why things didn't work. And at the time, dealing with viruses and very simple malware, nothing like what we have nowadays, right? But that got me in, and the honors internship led me to the New Jersey Regional Computer Forensics Laboratory of the FBI, led me to a background check that ultimately I'm sure many of your viewers are well aware of. They've done clearance-based jobs, the SF-86, and it's 100-plus pages of background. And
back when it was on paper. Now it's digital, but I remember doing it on paper. Yep.
Yes. Very painful to print that thing out and realize you're missing a page. But I got my top secret clearance, and was able to spend a summer with a lot of agents, a lot of law enforcement, and realized this is what I wanted to do. Finish my degree, put my application in to become an agent, and rotated from New Jersey back to Atlanta, and ended up getting accepted to a new agents training academy class as a special agent. Went through, graduated. And my first office assignment was Charlotte Division. So North Carolina is where I am now with my family. And that was most of my career up until the very end there, where I went to headquarters and did a temporary duty assignment, a TDY, as a supervisor. But throughout my career, I worked in counterintelligence, national security-based investigations, as well as cyber. And it was during my cyber time that I got into the FBI's computer analysis response team, which is CART. So it was the digital sciences piece, OTD, that you mentioned prior. And I was able to go through the, spend my time, pay my dues, go through the training, met a lot of people in the industry, both in the state and local law enforcement, as well as up through the RCFLs, and ultimately the same program that I got my feet in with the honors internship and learned as the intern, the guy that knows nothing knows nobody. I ended up actually supervising over that program.
Oh, wow.
Of my career. It was a fantastic kind of almost complete full circle career where I started out and then got to manage the program that brought me into the Bureau. It was fantastic.
That's really, really cool. So then you're working at the Bureau, you get to this almost the epitome of your career where you're going ahead and now you're managing the program that got you your start, which must have just been an amazing feeling. How do you then, when it's time to egress from the FBI, how do you then make it over to the private sector? How do you do that switch? And by the way, I have to stop and say, really awesome that you learned under Gary Kessler, right? Because how many of us don't look at his signatures, right?
Like exactly. Well, and little Easter egg for you. So if you Google Gary Kessler and he has got a header. He should still have a file header page.
Yes, that's the one we used to use back in the day. All of his signatures, all his, yes.
If you go all the way to the bottom, he has got a nice list of references of all the people that have added to that project over the years. At the very bottom, my name amongst many others is there. And Gary and I, and granted, that was his project, his baby, did a phenomenal job on it. But I had put forward many headers during the initial growth of that project, and I think it's still up and still there. I haven't looked at it.
I actually am going to tell you something funny. I just dropped it in there, and it was last updated on 4 September 2020. So he updated that 4 days ago.
That is awesome.
So not only is it still there, but it is still being updated. And
very cool.
Definitely a page I have referenced before in my career. So I think I thought it was really cool that you mentioned him. So past that neat little Easter egg. So how do you then go from Champlain to FBI? Now, how do you move? Obviously, you had that internship that brought you to law enforcement. How do you go from law enforcement to the private sector?
It is probably a story that for many starts with a phone call, and ultimately I was at the height of my career, if you will. And certainly many have stayed in, 20, 25 years, some even. In fact, my old SAC, the supervisory agent in charge of the Charlotte Division, I think is retiring at 30 years in FBI.
Wow.
Three decades is an incredible run, incredible career for me. I was in, and I think I moved very quickly, was able to do a lot of things, travel a lot of places, get into a lot of programs. For me at that time, honestly, I had no interest in switching private sector. But the right call came along and the right opportunity presented itself. And like many, look, law enforcement, especially the FBI, has an incredibly important role. I still stay in touch with many of the agents, many of the supervisors that I knew and gained professional relationships with. It is definitely a brotherhood, of course, on both sides of the gender aisle. But generically using the term, it is a brother and sisterhood of those who have gone through the academy together, who have gone through law enforcement, have gone through Hell Week, and have been sprayed in the face with OC, have been punched in the face during Bull in the Ring, and ultimately have gone on long investigations with each other where you sit in cars through very crazy hours and you do amazing things. It is a relationship and a bond that, while there are some awesome relationships in private sector, law enforcement is a very different community. And so going through that at the time in my career with my professional life, I had actually been away from my family for almost a year and a half to take that supervisory promotion, if you will. It was a hard time to be away from, at the time, 2 kids and a wife who was a phenomenal support to me be able to do that project. But the call came at just the right time, and the opportunity was to stay full time in digital forensics, which is what I wanted to do. Law enforcement, for me at the time, the badge, the gun, forensics was a piece of that. And as law enforcement's role, especially FBI's role, you are an investigator first and foremost, right? And forensics is a specialty. I wanted to do the forensics, and I had definitely enjoyed my time at the Bureau. At that point, with that call and some peripheral consideration with the family, it was a good opportunity for me to move forward into doing what I've done now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I love the fact that you were able to grow into realizing that at that juncture, what was right for you was to be able to focus on the digital forensics instead of the full investigation. And it's hard to leave that kind of camaraderie. I felt it not in the Bureau, but when I left the Marine Corps. And I think it's very, very similar, the relationships I still have with people I served with in the Marine Corps. So I totally get that leaving that is actually, there's like a string, a tether that never goes away. Like that tether is going to be there forever. And it's really neat to hear that you also have that same tether to those you served with in the Bureau. So that's really beautiful, and that you're able to maintain it and maintain those relationships. Because I think sometimes when people transition, as they finish a 20 or 30-year career, or as they hit the pinnacle of their career, then it's just the right time for their family. As you had said, that the fear that that bond will be severed, it's never severed. I think that's something that's really interesting, right? Like, I've been out of the Marine Corps for 13 years now, and I can tell you that bond is still pretty darn strong. And I'm sure you feel the same way about the Bureau. And I think that's an interesting reminder as people consider transitions in their lives. And I love the fact that you still acknowledge what an important, because it is an absolute critical role in our society that these investigations take place in. Semper Fi, Andrew. So that brings us to the stuff that you're doing now. And obviously one of the big things you're working on right now is about DFIR. Can you tell us a little bit about the growth? Because, I've seen an amazing growth in your project over the last couple of years. And I'd love to know more about what About DFIR is doing, what the original goal is, and what you're trying to do now.
It has been a journey, and the journey started ironically with a Google Sheet. For those of you, for your listeners that may have actually followed me during that time, years and years ago, it was actually something I was doing when I was still an agent in the FBI. I had originally started as an internal project for many of us within the CART program to start centralizing. And the FBI has some phenomenal internal resources. And this was one of those ways for me to organize and to learn and to teach, but also to trust but verify, right?
Absolutely.
Is a great resource for things when it was like, look, someone told me this, but I went and researched it to either prove it right or prove it still accurate. As we all know, forensics is an ever-evolving field, and what it might be accurate and forensically defensible one day may very much evolve the weeks prior, weeks after. And so what started out as a Google Sheet that was private and only for about 10 to 15 people ended up turning into a project that was publicly shared, publicly accessible, and started getting a massive amount of hits. In fact, so much so that Google, when you have a certain amount of concurrent visitors, current viewers to Google Sheet, they actually freeze, they cache the sheet. And the only way to get it to force is actually manually force the page to reload. And so I actually was beginning to see where the little avatar icons in the top right were so far left. So many people were starting to use it, pull information from it, that I was like, I actually had to post static links to it. So the project grew, and finally I got to the point where I was getting a lot of feedback. It was a hobby, right? It was a side project. I got to the point where I was like, I need to actually transition this and mature this to a standalone website. And I still remember the day I had been working on this website. Remember, undergrad with a little bit of focus on web design. Again, not a web design master by any stretch of the imagination, but was spending time behind scenes, behind closed doors, in off hours, working on the website. Finally launched the first iteration of the website, which is, I think right now we're on basically iteration 2, and officially put the link in the Google Sheet that the project had officially.
That's so cool. So the project recognized its own self. I love that.
Exactly. The link was replaced. All the content was taken out. A link was dropped. Please go here to the new aboutdfir.com website. So that's what birthed that website, that project, and then started bringing people in, because there's a lot of phenomenal people within this industry, and you can actually see that on the website. There's a bunch of people that I've brought in or that have volunteered their time. And again, it's a project, it's a hobby, right? This is not something we get paid for. You'll notice there's no advertisements anywhere on that website. I pay for it out of my own, and I'm happy to do so for the purposes of our scientific field having a resource. And there are other very good websites out there. I have some very friendly jokes with another gentleman and another user that has been on your show before that has a very good website. At the end of the day, as long as our websites contribute to the field, that's the goal.
I mean, I know I've sent emails to you and the owner of another website before saying, here's an idea, whoever wants to run with it, run with it. And I've definitely done that more than once. And I thank you because you've ran with them, right? So just thank you so much for doing that. And, because it doesn't make sense sometimes to start up a new site that does something when there is a compendium that does house everything. So I love the fact that you've continued to grow the site in that manner and have a diversity of content there. It's great. Lori mentioned that she thanks you for your hosting her thesis paper, and that's some of the cool things you've done. I remember going to your Google Sheet all the time and using it back in the day when you had your iOS cheat sheet.
Yes.
And I actually, which is still a Google Sheet, but is now referenced on the page. I don't think it's been updated since iOS 12, so I know it's an older resource. But back when iOS 7 and 8 were around and I was still in the lab, I used to use that sheet for a very unique reason, which was to explain to my leadership what the expectations should be on a device I received as far as access that was available. And it was just such a useful resource. I also know that I am probably at fault for definitely some of your Google Sheet overloads because I used to bring up your website in my classes so that people could see a source for other links. So I'll take some blame in you overrunning that because it wasn't just me hitting. I was introducing it to 20 people every term. But now that About DFIR is there, like I said when I was introducing you, it's a site that I regularly use and that I regularly promote. And one of the things that I love about it is something that's unique to your site, and that's the jobs page. And I love it because one of the most frequent questions that I get asked is, how do you get into digital forensics? How do you find jobs? And there are great places to look for, and thank you, Kevin, for dropping a link to the jobs page. If anyone's looking, what's great about this page is that it's focused on digital forensics jobs. And oftentimes we'll tell people to go is I'll be like, oh, well, check out Ninja Jobs. They have digital forensics stuff. And when this page first started, there wasn't much there, right? It took a lot of pushing both people who had job posts and people who didn't to go there. And I know I was a big pusher to your site for that page of both sending employers and prospective employees. And the big reason was there was nothing that really met that need for digital forensics. And one of the problems in digital forensics is our job titles are a freaking mess.
Yes. They're all over the board.
They're all over the board. And if you look at the titles on that page, you'll see they're all over the board. I once wrote a matrix for my students. I did a blog post on it, but it's a matrix of, first word, second word, third word of words that could make up possible job titles in digital forensics. It was before your jobs page existed. And I used to give my students this matrix so that they could go on places like Ninja Jobs, which does focus on cybersecurity, but other places that focus on engineering jobs as well, and try to work the matrix to basically script all the possible job names that could be. And with this page, nobody has to do that anymore. And what's really cool is I know you only keep things up that are recent. So everything on there, I think right now is from July. And there is a score of jobs up there. And I'm probably the only person who uses
it has grown tremendously.
20, but
yep.
And right now is not what people would consider this vast hiring period of time. So, and there's worldwide job opportunities on there. It's not just North America. Anyway, I think it's great and brilliant. And I really appreciate it because nothing like that exists for this community. And it's such a needed resource, especially because as we're immature as a career field, we don't have good titles.
It is interesting to see the vast amount of titles. And I think that also is the industry, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of human resource groups, a lot of hiring groups for companies, they are still learning about us, right? And I think sometimes the C-suite say, hey, we know of this thing, we know of the field, we need someone. Well, It's a lot different to say, hey, I've always hired this type of person, pull the job description off the shelf. It's totally different to say, I need to design a brand new job description.
Yes.
And you and I have both seen, and I'm sure many of your listeners have, where sometimes you'll read a job description and it's like, we want 20 years experience in this thing. And you're thinking to yourself, this hasn't been around for that long. It is an education of the industry. It's also us, I think, still. It speaks a little bit still to the how fast we're growing and the maturity of what I think companies expect us to do, but also what we can do. Because digital forensics is that overarching umbrella. There's incident response. There's cell phone. There's so many subject matter expertises, which then also complicate the job descriptions.
Right, and that's one of the issues, right? Because we're a subdiscipline of information security, cybersecurity, whatever you want to call it, and then within that, we have all of these niche things, right? Like, where does a malware reverse engineer fit? I don't know. Is that part of digital forensics? Is it not? Is it something askew aside? But a lot of the times their work is directly for a digital forensics group. It's so fascinating. And I just think it's great how you've brought this whole team in to build such this amazing resource that has everything from resources for A to Z IR investigations, right? Like, who else has built a workflow? And you have warrant templates, and you have colleges and universities, both undergrad and postgrad. You have lists of Twitter handles. You have just so many great things there. Such a great resource. But where does the guy who built the resource, what resources do you go to? What's your resource?
Ooh, that's a good question. I can't cop out and say about DFIR.com. So, that's a very interesting question. I think I'm going to answer it like this. It has changed over time. What was my resource 10 years ago was my own knowledge growth, my taking education, diving and pursuing SAN certifications, pursuing private sector certifications, taking notes and wanting to memorialize that someplace, right? Building and finding my own research, finding some new thing, some new forensic artifact, and realizing a find all evidence button does not exist inside of a tool. Design a workflow. Has anyone ever done this before? Well, the Googles don't tell me or find anything on the first 2 pages, therefore it must not exist. And so the birth of About DFIR and the related information was largely, I think, my own research and development. Mm-hmm. And that changed slowly over time. And I would say it has changed over time in most recent years, whereas I've taken different roles. Now at Kroll in my post FBI career, I started out as a forensicator with Kroll, and I was able to transition very gracefully. And Kroll was extremely supportive of me continuing forensics, what they hired me to do. And then I slowly rose to a team lead. And then I rose to an assistant managing director, which allowed me to start managing and building a very large team. And then ultimately, Kroll promoted me to, a managing director and head of incident response for North America. So my role now is not in the nitty gritty. It's not in the binary. It's not in the reverse engineering of malware just because it's new. My role now as this incident response lead is helping clients through disasters. And I think the underpinnings of where I came from is why I'm able to do this job. I think the ability to speak, if I need to dive deep with the IT team or a Fortune 50 or Fortune 100 company that has their own forensics team, I can dive deep if I need to. But to get back to your original question, the team that I have been blessed to build and blessed to work with at Kroll is who I draw upon my knowledge now. Because they're the ones that have now replaced me, what I used to do 10, 15 years ago. They are the ones that are in the nitty gritty on the daily basis. And while I may still look at logs and I may still pull up X-ways and I may still deep dive when I need to, it is not something I have time to do on a daily basis, right? My presentations now are at the board level, the C-suite level, working and navigating and managing teams to help a client navigate an incident. And so while I love that natural progression of my career and I love where I'm at, that means that I have less time for the nitty-gritty forensics because my time and my balance is now relying upon the expertise of the people that I have been able to hire or that Kroll has brought in from a wide range of backgrounds, from law enforcement to private sector to other incident response companies. And so now the information that goes on there are many contributors you can see on there, and I am happy to share that, right? If anything, I came up with the idea. I birthed the idea, I led it to a progression, and now I'm very happy to see it continue growing and running on its own, and bringing people in that are going to be good contributors and use their hobby time to advance their careers and become their own personalities, their own people within this industry. It's almost at the point where I can now take a step back and have people that are in their career where I was 10 years ago.
I think that's one of the most critical things as you grow, is recognizing that your job is to replace yourself, that you always want to be setting yourself up with people who can do what you did, who can do it better. And then only then can you move into the next step for you. And I think it's a really critical realization to realize that your job is to get other people to take over and do the things you used to do. And there are so many great people working on your site. I mean, Andrew Rathbun, Tony Knutson, Mary Ellen, and I apologize for everyone who I'm forgetting who works on the site, but there's a whole slew of them, and I know you have them listed there. And I think it's great that... Huh?
And some new ones coming soon. I won't spoil it, but I will tease that Andrew has met a very, very interesting individual. And I was recently called out on Twitter, actually, for having a old, out-of-date CTF page. And so I challenged the individual. I said, this is a resource, it's a community. And ultimately, if you'd like to bring new information, I would love to put it up there and give you credit. And so what has sparked as an interesting, and again, it was a gentle jab of, hey, great resource, but it's a lot of date, which I fully recognize. He and Andrew are going to be working together very soon to breathe some extreme new life into the CTF, but not just here's a link dump. Here's where the challenges have been solved. Here's the walkthroughs. Here's the blog.
Thank you. Here's
the challenge. Do it yourself. Here's how someone else did it.
I am so happy to hear that, because as somebody who's written CTFs, after the CTF, there's always all these great write-ups. And I'm going to tell you what I always do. After the CTF, people always ask me questions, and I always refer them to all the CTF write-ups. And typically what I do is I go to This Week in Forensics and search for the CTF, pull all the sites from Phil's site, and then I send an email, and I'm usually including three things: the original CTF questions, the original images that were used, images or resources that were used for the challenge, and then all the write-ups about how people solved. And knowing that, and that's what people want, so knowing that there'll be a page that includes all of those things, that's going to be fantastic. And when we get off the air, I want to take a guess as to who it is who's helping Andrew, because I'm willing to rage a guess, but I won't do it on air, as not to do that to that human. But I think I know who it might be, and I'm so curious if I'm right, but that's okay. So that's really super exciting to hear about the page and to hear about the growth and how you're bringing new people in. And I also like the fact that when somebody brought to you, hey, this isn't right, you challenge them to you're right, the page is out of date, help me grow it. If this is something that you have a passion for and you really want, and obviously they had a passion for that, finding that information, because they went to you to find it. So if you can go find it in the other places and bring it all here, oh, that is so freaking awesome. That is so freaking awesome. And I do know that several of the CTFs that I've ran previously, that the questions are not up anymore, just the solutions. If whoever it is who's randomly doing that wants to get in touch with me, I will blog out the questions and reference the images so that they can have that. Because once the CTF-DIO site goes down, I frequently don't have them. But chances are I can recreate them from,
Well, and I will also challenge your viewers and your listeners, and those that view this in the future in the archive pages, the great catch up. At the end of the day, if you are hosting a CTF and you want someplace to memorialize that CTF, consider the website, because we're happy to not only host the information, we're happy to give full credit where credit is due and make sure that it is a resource that maintains itself for the industry going forward.
Well, that's really good to know. I mean, Trey Amick is kicking off a weekly CTF starting next week. that Magnet's going to be doing that's going to be rolling. And so I think we need to figure out how to host something that's changing every week too. So as far as memorializing it post. So I'm going to challenge you back on figuring out a way to represent that. Because what's been so great is there's been so many amazing CTF challenges that are coming out, and they're just such a great resource for people to grow and test their knowledge. And they're also just a great source of images for testing and for looking at and for doing validation. So it's just awesome that you're going to have that available as well. So kudos to making that resource not even just existent, because there are other CTF references, but for finding a way to co-host the solutions. And that's going to be great for all those people like Kevin Pagano who write up solutions all the time for their CTFs to have someplace else where they're referenced. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. So you've worked all these really cool things. You've got to have some good DFIR war stories for us.
Ooh, war stories to protect the innocent and provide anonymization. So I do. Let me think for a second here. Why don't I do this for your viewers? Why don't I give 2 war stories? I'll give one for my law enforcement days, and I'll give one for my Kroll days. Of course, there's only so much I can share. One was an active court case that did result in prosecution, and one was an insider threat case that I did here at Kroll. So let me talk through both of these. So awesome. One of my favorite cases from my time in the FBI, I was very involved from start to finish. Phenomenal case. But it has its learning points, and it had a pitfall too. So law enforcement we executed a search warrant. I was there as a law enforcement as well as a forensics capacity. And my goal, as once the house was cleared and everything was secured, was basically to set up and begin with agents, detectives. We're going through the home, the residents. They would find digital evidence, take appropriate chain of custody, procedures from photographing in place to documenting, and ultimately then call it out. And I would identify, is this something I triage here on site? Is this something here that I, box, and document and take back to the lab? And the goal there at the time was that we had enough predicate for a search warrant. We were looking for some very specific information. And what I'll say to your viewers is that it was information. It was crimes against children. Very, I'm sure many of your viewers who have done the law enforcement have very much done this aspect of law enforcement. It is a calling. It is a extremely important thing that law enforcement does. It is also something that you must make sure you maintain mental balance, because it is probably, of all the things law enforcement does, it is this and undercover work are probably one of the things that will absolutely strain a marriage, strain your relationships when you are there to defend children and the evil that exists in this world. So this law enforcement investigation was predicated on potential risk to a child. And as we're going through the residence, there are many things going on. We've got 25 people there. I'm in a particular location within the residence where I am triaging evidence, and I'm looking for something very specific. I'm looking for particular proof of what we suspected was there, and that we had proof from other investigative means of what we expected to be there. And I found it. And so ultimately was able to use that to continue the search warrant process and to go back to the court, to go back to the judge, show that the warrant that had been authorized by the Middle or Eastern District of North Carolina was not only valid, but also was in pursuit of the next goal, which was successful prosecution and recovery of that child. And over the course of the next 3 to 4 months, I forensicated over 162 pieces of evidence from one home.
Wow. One house, 162 pieces of digital evidence.
Yes, thumb drives, hard drives, laptops, netbooks, servers, including even a wireless connected hard drive in the attic of the residence that had been put there for the best signal. And as we're going through, almost missed that piece of evidence, but realized I had a device on the wireless network that was still that was mapped drive storage, and we hadn't taken it offline. It was still active.
This is really critical about triage, because a lot of people don't think how important it is to actually look at the active network connections and make sure that you get everything that's on an active network connection. Such a critical step. So sorry. So you get so in the attic, because you're like, holy crap, we still got to find this. So the fact that you found it in the attic, that's great.
Yep. It almost brought back my FBI training days, because in the academy, there's a place called Hogan's Alley. For those of you that are very likely heard that term, it's in Mock City on the FBI Catering Academy. And what's great about this is you can do everything from hotels. There's a hotel, there's a restaurant. There's so many places where the trainers are obviously preparing new agents for all sorts of different situations. And one of the great stories I have very briefly is that we had a search of a hotel room, and this our particular agent that was training us hid electronics in places. And I thought to myself, there will never be someone who hides a thumb drive up in the curtain rod above a window. And here I am as a shiny new agent on location. And where else do I find a hard drive but in the attic crawl space right in the middle of all of the actual installation that was placed there, not for necessarily, and based on the interviews, not for actually hiding it, because it had the best signal.
Because it had the best signal.
Oh
my gosh.
But
gosh.
The things that you never think you'll deal with, and then also here you are. So, and I'm sure many of your viewers have very similar war stories. But to keep the story moving, so I spend next several months diving. This case begins to consume me because of what I mentioned prior. Our goal was to properly recover a child and to extricate that child from a dangerous situation.
So active victims still in harm's way while you're working this case. That can be so mentally consuming, because you feel like you should be spending every waking hour doing what you can to help recover that child.
And I did. And I started probably about the 2 to 3 month mark between court appearances. And of course, I'm working with a case agent who it is his case, right? I'm in a support role as another agent doing the forensics piece. And I've got hundreds of pieces of evidence, right? Over 160 pieces of unique evidence. So all of the imaging, all of the triage at the time, everything within the evidence within the criminal realm, it's a little different. And I'll tell this in my later story for the criminal side. In law enforcement, it is really everything, right? And I'm not saying that it's not everything in private sector, but we are much more triage oriented, because the goal in private sector incident response is not criminal prosecution. It is containment, remediation, and the benefit of the client to understand the who, what, when, where, how, why.
Stop the bleeding, start the breathing.
Exactly. So in law enforcement, it is the criminal prosecution, both in the preparation of a case, but also eventually testimony, right? The trial. So many things in law enforcement are a little bit different when it comes to forensics. So the bottom line is, I am now 2 to 3 months into this, and I am looking at millions of videos and pictures. And I am sorting, looking for something very specific, and I'm not finding it. So I ended up breaking out at Microsoft Excel. And so I had a lot of great tools at the time, won't go into on this call, but the bottom line is I had a lot of great tools that helped me triage massive amounts of data, do some really great visual editing. A lot of law enforcement community still uses these tools. And we in North Carolina had an incredible database. Our Crimes Against Children Task Force had just tens of millions of hashes. We, of course, worked with NCMEC. We worked with a lot of other entities. It was a massive database collection. And so ultimately I'm filtering things, but I'm finding stuff that's never been hashed before at the point in time. At that point in the career, we didn't have matches. So it's a lot of manual. We're bringing task force members, other agents to help us. But I'm looking again. I'm not looking for the other stuff. I'm looking for a particular victim. So a lot of facial recognition, a lot of tonal grade recognition, a lot of things to help me filter. But again, dealing with millions of images and videos. And at the time, a lot of the video recognition software was not as automated as it is now. So a lot of manual, a lot of doing framed chopping of videos, so that I'm trying to get through these quickly. And ultimately, this spreadsheet that I built, everyone's got that story where they're so proud of a project, and ultimately it ended up being like a 5-minute
Excel.
But I built this spreadsheet that ultimately chronologically and from a timeline perspective told a story of my victim and the creation of photos and videos over a multi-week process. And there reaches a point in the timeline where I'm realizing that I'm getting a very good flow to cameras. And this was actually a case where I learned so much about camera forensics, everything down from the way the pixel marking is unique to certain lenses.
I just lost your audio, Devon.
Still got me?
Yeah, I got you. Sorry.
Okay, perfect. Everything from the pixel imagery within the camera, within particular photos, the way you can grid that to help to actually mark things that are taken with certain camera lenses, even down to beginning to realize that your subject, your person, is someone who has used a camera between different scenes. And so what pictures that lived one day then had more pictures added from a totally different locale, and you're beginning to separate that, but you're beginning to learn, right? You're beginning to learn what is this person's daily life with this camera that was very pivotal to this individual. And it wasn't a cell phone, it was an old school traditional camera. Well, not old school as far as old tape, old school, but it was digital. And so, and of course, with that 160 plus pieces of evidence, I've got micro SD cards, I've got these cards that are all over the place. And I suddenly, in this timeline, this is a great, for all of your listeners, this is one of the great things about timelines, because some of us we dive into evidence, right? We want to investigate, we want to find things, and our tools to find the proverbial find evidence button is there. And we dive into the sea of evidence. At some point, you need to sort it. At some point, you need to make it manageable. And timelines tell the story. Every time. No matter what type of branch of forensics you're in, it tells a story. From malware infecting a box to leading to a secondary payload to lateral movement, from a cell phone, the timeline is the best storyteller. And so this timeline I've built is now spanning multiple weeks. It is thousands of rows. But the way I built it was name of image, the metadata I cared about, or the EXIF data, and a thumbnail. And my case agent come in, my AUSA could come in, and they could scroll down through this. And one of the questions I got asked was, hey, here there's a chunk, and you've noticed in big yellow highlight, there's a chunk missing. And I said, I think I'm missing a piece of evidence.
Oh.
3 months into the investigation, 160 plus pieces of evidence, and I am missing a chunk in time and a gap in my chronology and the numerology of the photos, right? So let's just make up a number. Right? Picture 05666. All of a sudden, I jump to picture 05777, just as an example. Right. I'm missing pictures. And the piece I'm looking for the minor is missing. And so 3 months in, we obviously can't go back to the scene. If we missed it, we missed it. If it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. So I'm left with, I've put so much time and energy, I can't have missed it. I can't have lost this. It's got to be here. I'm rescouring through the forensic images. I'm rescouring through making sure things processed correctly. It is consuming. It is consuming, but with an appropriate balance, right? I am a dog with a bone. I'm an investigator at heart. And at the end of the day, I'm looking for something. Right. And a piece of evidence came to us, interestingly enough, from an interesting source, found out that an individual had returned to the home after the law enforcement cleared. They had knowledge of a particular micro SD card that was hidden in a particular place in the home. And that micro SD card was taken from the home. It was tampered with. Evidence was removed from it. And then what was left was turned over to law enforcement. And so, interestingly enough, it had been very securely overwritten. The evidence had been tampered with, and I was not able to get to the really critical piece I wanted, but it led me to something. It led me to a particular artifact within the EXIF data that allowed me to extrapolate information back about a chronology piece, something very unique to the particular model of camera. And so I went back to my original evidence and I added that new piece of learned knowledge, and I all of a sudden get all of this new information that floods back to me from one of the primary forensic tools I'm using at the time. And I have all these new photos. The EXIF data had been stripped from them. The creation times had been altered based on the way the data had been moved between systems, good old file system forensics, and nothing from a naming convention matched. But remember what I said earlier, I had started learning things about camera forensics with pixelation, with the way the camera actually marks the photo at a micro level. And I was able to use a lot of this information to go back to my original evidence, refeed through it, and I started getting new images. I found a majority of my images that I had been missing originally. And I got down to where I was missing one image. And here's the fascinating piece, and I'll end the story on this. I'm looking at my slideshow, and it's, think of someone who's going click, moving, click, moving, click. And that follows a cadence, right? 1, 2, 3 seconds, click. 1, 2, 3 seconds, click. The slideshow follows this cadence perfectly. The person moving in the frame, it's natural. And so suddenly I realized I've got about a 10 to 12 second gap. Now I've gone from days down to I've got a 10 to 12 second gap. I'm like, I want that photo. Because one of the things I could not prove, one of the things the subject in this matter was like, you can't tie me to the camera that took the pictures. I was not the person that did the thing you're interested in. Challenge accepted. And so I finally get to a point in time. One of the last pictures I have is the miner reaching like this. So this is the picture, just like I'm on your screen now, someone reaching. Well, what naturally do you think came next? The person reaching for the camera, taking it, turning it, and taking a picture. What am I missing? I'm missing about a 12-second gap where someone would have reached, taken a camera, turned, and taken a picture. I'm missing that picture. So now I'm on a hunt, right? But I also have learned things about the way the camera has taken, and I spread across all my pieces of evidence, and I find a picture in a folder location for my subject under a user profile for a computer that was not relevant to anything else in our forensics. It was a clean laptop by all accounts. Nothing related to the crime, nothing related to the investigation. I find one picture, and at the time, I had thought selfie, because I had actually seen this picture like one of my investigation. I realized it fit the timeline, it fit the chronology, and then traditional forensics kicked in. How did this picture get from the camera to the card to the computer?
Right.
And I actually, through traditional forensics, everything was able to tie everything together to find how the picture moved from one system in an SD card slot as a mounted map device. The picture got moved across the network. Remember the drive that was hidden in the app?
Yes.
It hit the drive at one point, and then it copied over to the laptop and was used, interestingly enough, as a profile picture. That profile was perfect. That's what I wanted. The person behind the camera was my miner, tying the person that had been taking all the pictures and the videos to the crime.
That is phenomenal forensics and investigative work. Just incredible. What I have to tell you is at the beginning, when you first started talking, I wasn't going to interrupt you. Lori said any SD cards. And then obviously you went down this route of all these SD cards. Also, Lori mentioned that she once had a case where she found printed images in a plastic bag in a toilet tank. And it just goes to show you that, there can be things in places you couldn't imagine. And I would say it's a good thing that nowadays we have electronic detection dogs like Siri helping out in these investigations, because data can be in weird places. Wow, phenomenal story. And now you're going to tell us something that's happened on the other side of the house?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what. I'll tell you an insider threat case. Keep me honest on time. So this was a very, very good case. So certainly in private sector incident response, and I say this, we do a lot of what law enforcement does, right? A lot of your viewers, we are doing traditional forensics cases, digital forensic science investigations, but usually much of, again, what we do is for private sector, it's very different from the criminal prosecutorial side, right? At some point, the case goals diverge a little bit, but the core forensics still remains intact. It's still largely who, what, when, where, how, why, but it's not because we're going to go kick in a door and arrest somebody. And the private sector side, it's because you're securing the client's network, you're explaining what happened, and ultimately, at least with what I do, as I'm sure many other viewers are for private sector, ultimately in our world here now, and what I do at Kroll, is there a legal requirement for the client with a risk to data? Was it viewed, accessed, staged, acquired, or exfiltrated? And does it invoke or trigger a state, federal, regulatory law? From HIPAA with PHI to state laws with private and PII, that is our goal, right? But our investigations still overlap with law enforcement much of the time. And so every chance I get, certainly under the attorney-client privilege, as many of our investigations are, where we have the opportunity to benefit law enforcement. Now I have seen both sides of it, right? And the law enforcement world was very focused on this thing, and private sector was one way I got to the thing. Now I'm on the other side. And so with that, let me tell you this quick story. So I had a case, and these are what I love. It wasn't a traditional ransomware case. It wasn't a traditional, banking Trojan malware or business email compromise. It was an insider threat. So it was like the core of what I used to in law enforcement, but now I'm on the other side. It was a suspected insider threat case. Love doing these because everyone's a little different. Everyone has different nuances. And I'll keep it high level. The bottom line is company A is in a court hearing with company B, an arbitration matter. And company B has information that they revealed during that particular court time that company A knew nobody should know.
Oh.
It's extremely private, not been brought up in their case by them, but company B knew this information. They suspected they had an inside threat. When we're brought the case, the only thing I have is this was said during a court case, an arbitration meeting, and they shouldn't have it. Go figure out who the insider threat is. Talk about diving into an ocean of how am I going to boil this ocean down, right? You've got hundreds of employees, thousands of pieces of equipment. Where am I diving into this? Because I mean, look, you've got two companies that are, a group of people left company A, they went to company B, they could have taken something. Forensic evidence may not exist. Like, I'm diving in, my mind's running tons of questions. So I had a really good team that worked with me on this, and ultimately ended up we deployed software, we grabbed logs, we identified a lot of interesting things, but nothing that tied to an insider threat. You always find malware, you always find other things, but nothing that tied to a smoking gun. We're probably, and everyone's going to think I'm just making up numbers, but we're about 3 or 4 months into this one as well. And and I was at the time earlier in my career where I was doing the hands-on forensics more, and I was looking at logs on a regular basis. And at that time, so Office 365, those that have watched my videos and as well, kind of earlier in my career, I spent a lot of time with Office 365 forensics, diving a little bit deeper.
365 presentation that you've done. I'll try to find the link, but keep going.
Absolutely. It's on YouTube and referenced on SANS. Yes. Little dated, but still I think a good gem. But anyways, I'm diving through logs manually. We had written a lot of scripts at the time to help us parse things, but I'm still downloading data on a regular occurring basis. So it's not just looking historical. I'm looking to see if the insider threat, if one exists, and still at the time I was middle of the road, right? I trust but verify. Client suspected, I'm looking for the proof, the forensic defensibility of the suspicion. And so I had a range of IP addresses for company B, and I'm looking to see if they ever pop up in any of our logs. And of course they don't. And I'm 3 or 4 months into this, I'm getting to the point where I'm like, I think we need to pull the plug. I don't think there's something here. Probably someone mentioned something in a meeting. And again, this is just a huge ocean of data. Where are you looking for that one sliver? And all of a sudden, I get an alert on one of my monitoring log systems, and it's for one of the IP addresses I had flagged months earlier in the investigation. And it flags with an associated login for a user account. Thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. Why would the IP address for company B be logged into an email account?
Right.
That's interesting.
That's kind of odd.
And so it is odd. And so I realize it is with a current employee, and the device is theirs. It's their laptop, but the IP address is for what I presumed at the time was a wireless network for the competitor.
Oh.
And so suddenly start realizing, well, now this is interesting. Why would my company A employee be at company B location?
Right.
And
with their work laptop.
With their work laptop. And so this of course breathed new life into an investigation, right? Like, I've got a client who thinks we should have found things. I'm managing expectations, but I'm also, there's no reason to have a daily phone call when there's nothing to report, right? So, but now we've got something. Now we've got something interesting. We've got a thread to pull on. And so traditional investigations kick in here, right? How can I get potentially the laptop? Now I'm going to turn this person's from a legal perspective and from a forensic perspective, kind of inside out. From a business owned perspective, whatever I can touch under corporate policies, I'm going to dive in. And we did some very, very cool techniques I can't talk about on this call, but the bottom line is we did some very neat techniques to get information from business owned devices under the authority of our contractual obligations, under the authority of the user agreements that the company had in place, and ultimately was able to build a timeline from that point backwards. Now I didn't have to just 60, 90 days. I had to go back months. And we slowly realized this was actually an insider threat that had started almost 9 months prior. Slowly taking information a lot that was being paid, and ultimately end up having a lot of information related to both organizations. And we identified our insider threat, and it led to some phenomenal work with law enforcement. It led to some phenomenal work for the client, where we were actually able to build a timeline, show the things, and also identified other data that our client had never suspected it being at risk. We were actually able to show particular, as many of you know, shell bags are wonderful things, but we were able to find and build a chronology of directories being browsed that should never have been browsed by the individual, information that was taken, moved to thumb drives, to removable hard drive, transferred to cloud storage, and ultimately built this very, I hope, very useful package for our client of data at risk that they then went to law enforcement, and we were able to take kind of a back seat, if you will, because at that point it was, now we have done the digging. Now it's time for law enforcement to do what they're very good at. And so that was a private sector war story that was very fun. It was a little, everyone's heard the ransomware stories. Everyone's heard the business email compromises. Right. This was an actual true insider threat, coming to work every day, sitting in a chair with other people around him or her, and ultimately taking information for the financial benefit of another organization.
Competitor.
Great work.
Wow. Excellent. excellent work. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And it just goes to show that you can have really intriguing, technically difficult, but also very valuable cases, regardless of which side of the fence you're on. And I think that's really important, that you can still get those cases that you get mentally drawn into, that you get passionate, that you're like, I've got to solve the puzzle. And when you solve that puzzle, like that feeling when you found that image, that feeling when you found that IP link going and which laptop that was and that user who was, that feeling is irreplaceable. And I think it's something that people who don't do forensics don't understand that we get to feel. So thanks so much for sharing those with us. We've got about 5 minutes left. So in that last 5 minutes, I was wondering if you could share with us your advice to people who are looking to get into forensics.
Ooh. I would say this humbly. Leave your egos at the door. This community, like many communities within IT, within red team communities, blue team communities, purple team communities, there are all sorts of personalities. And we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different knowledge. And run very quickly from anyone who says they know it all. But
amen. Yes.
Even those that act like they do, everyone has something to contribute.
Yes.
Everyone, regardless of their personality. But personality is, of course, what is the trifecta of relationships, right? I can work well with someone if their personality does not wear on me on a daily basis, right? But professionalism and leaving egos at the door will benefit any investigation, any forensics piece. And so how does this relate back to getting into this field? When you are new in this field, you are full of questions and, I hope, a thirst or a hunger for information knowledge. And one of the things we traditionally do as babies or as newbies in this field is ask questions. You are going to be met with a range of responses, from you should know this to this is so easy, how could you not know this, to you should have Googled this first, or kind of the sarcasm of let me Google that for you. Take a breath. Don't worry about the personality. Focus on your hunger for the information. Pursue knowledge, but pursue it in a forensically defensible manner. Remember, our field is at its core a scientific discipline.
Amen.
And ultimately, you must do work yourself. But find a mentor, find someone in this field who you can bounce ideas off of. Take advantage of being able to write papers and post them on about DFIR and letting the community rip them apart. Leave the ego at the door. Take critical feedback. If you don't think that myself, if I have not been ripped earlier in my career with forensic assumptions, incorrect assertions, absolutely I have. And am I there yet? No. Am I still learning? Every day.
Yes.
Every day. And so that, I think, succinctly put, I would tell anyone getting into forensics, bring it. Bring your hunger. Bring your thirst for information. Bring your pursuit of knowledge. Break forensic artifacts to basics and rebuild them. Because only then in this scientific discipline are you going to be able to articulate what you know. Don't be a tool drone. Understand what it is your tool is telling you, because you will find times, I think more this field than any other field of science, you will find times when your tool may be only as good as the programmer that built it. And you may be able to find times when your scientific research, your digital forensic research leads to a new finding. That's what this field is about. And that's everyone from the newcomers to the experienced.
Yes. You hit on so many things there. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly with everything you said. I would say it makes me sad that people would ever respond in the ways you suggested, that I know people sometimes respond when people who are new to the field ask questions. They are correct in that people do need to do that first dive and research themselves, that you should look first for the answer, but we should never dissuade that hunger or that passion, right? We have to feed it. And none of us know everything in this field. Every single one of us is learning every day. Every time you see somebody who maybe you admire in this field put out a blog, guess why? They put out a blog because there was something they didn't know and they just figured it out, because all this field is full of is questions. It's all questions. So even the people who you think have the answers, they only have the answers to the question they just happen to have just answered. They don't know the answers to the others. It's just questions. Thank you so much. Great sage advice. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing more about you. So great to get to spend today with you. So thank you, Devon.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm looking forward to a future karaoke.
Ah, yes, it is on once COVID is gone. So that rhymed. That was really bad. Now I've got to work it into a lyric. I can't wait to do some Journey with you. It'll be good fun.
Absolutely.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Next week, we'll have Ladrina Sharon on. Really looking forward to that. A whole slew of other guests down the road. Please feel free to go to magnetforensics.com/cash up to see any previous or get links for future episodes. We'll see you next week.